Greetings, this is Charles Darwin, and in the typical low-tech manner for which this channel is famous, I have just held up for you a printout of an image of Captain Robert FitzRoy, and he's the one I'm going to talk to you about today. Those of you who know anything about FitzRoy probably have heard that he and I were enemies. That is not true. As in any relationship, the truth is much more complicated than that. Now, here's the background. Many of you already know this. I went on a voyage around the world in 1832 on board HMS Beagle. Robert FitzRoy was the captain of that voyage. And on that voyage, I saw many things, especially in South America, and most famously in the Galapagos Islands. But at the time, I interpreted those things in terms of a religious viewpoint, which is what I had at the time. It was only later that I thought about what I had seen and came up with the theory of evolution and published it. And when FitzRoy read what I had published, then he became very angry at me. But that doesn't mean that he was a bad man. He regretted having been the captain of the voyage on which I saw these things. But let me tell you some good things about FitzRoy and why I could never really dislike him completely. First is, he made thousands of measurements on that voyage and on others as well, upon which some of the best maps of South America that had ever been seen in the world were based. Hundreds of measurements, and often were made under conditions in which there were storms, and it was very difficult work, but he persisted and he did it. The second thing is that many people consider him to be the father of modern meteorology. The weather report, basically. Now, his work was discontinued when he put weather reports in British newspapers because he was often wrong. But think about it, he had very little to work with. Today, we have satellite images, and we have all kinds of measurements of air temperature and pressure, etc., from all over the place, upon which meteorologists can base their predictions. And even today, in the 21st century, they are often incorrect. Well, not very often, but they were often incorrect in FitzRoy's day because all he had to work with was telegraph reports. He would get telegraphs from different places telling him, oh, there's a storm here, and he would figure out how fast it was coming, which direction it was going, and make a prediction of when and where that storm would hit England. So today, whenever you get out your phones and look at the weather report or something, you have Captain Robert FitzRoy to thank for that. And perhaps you sit around all day and watch the Weather Channel. And if you do, that's even sadder than you sitting around and watching this channel all day. But once in a while, it's good to check out the Weather Channel. It's good to check out this channel as well. So he had a number of important contributions that he made to cartography and to meteorology. Now, he had some problems that might have been associated with a genetic basis, as we now understand it, for hereditary diseases, anger, and depression. And this may have been based on a family history. He did, after all, have an ancestor who committed suicide. Let me give you some examples. While on the voyage, we called him Hot Coffee because he would often boil over and get angry. So one example is when he got some slaves and their slave owners together from Brazil, and he was trying to convince me that the slaves were happy to be slaves. And what happened is, in the presence of the slave owners, he asked, are you happy being slaves? And I said, yeah, we're happy. And then I pointed out to him, you can't possibly believe this. Of course that's what they're going to say. They're fearing punishment if they said, no, we don't like it at all. They would be punished by their slave owners. And anyway, but he got angry at me for that, but very soon he calmed down. And later in our voyage around South America, I was on land a lot and he was in the ocean, and we had to stay in touch with one another. And the only way to do that back then was through letters. You know, we didn't have texts and cell phones back then. And some of these letters that he sent to me not only were friendly, but were actually kind of punchy with their humor. So we didn't dislike each other even at that time. Now, the second thing is, he was always religious. For instance, when we were in South America, he was always trying to interpret the geologic deposits in terms of his biblical view. I assume that nobody does that anymore today in the 21st century. What? There are people who do that? Oh, I wish you hadn't told me that. Anyway, when he finally became really openly fundamentalist was not during the voyage, but after the voyage, when he was writing up his volumes for the Voyage of the Beagle, and he put in his whole theory of the religiously based view of the human race. And also, he had racist views, especially of the natives of Tierra del Fuego. Of course, I did too. We all did. That's just the way British were in the 19th century. That doesn't make it right, but that's what we were like. And you could see his bias in there when he had drawings, and he'd taken some children with him from the Fuegian tribes to England, educated them in the British fashion, and then he took them back. And then he was surprised. He was thinking that these British-educated Fuegian children would teach the others the obviously superior British way of life. And then they didn't do it. They went back to living the way they had before. And he couldn't understand it. But he did some drawings, for instance, of Jemmy Bucket before and after. Before, when he was in England, and after, when he had gone back to Tierra del Fuego. Same person. And yet, the drawings that he showed looked very different. It's as if Jimmy Button's face had actually changed. His skull had changed shape, which is of course not possible, but that was an underlying bias that he had. But you know, he wasn't that bad of a man. He really thought he was trying to help them. That's what he thought. And then he was depressed by his failures. The first thing that he was depressed about was his failure to convert the Fuegians. He tried so hard and it didn't work. And then the second failure was when he came back, he became a politician. He was appointed governor of New Zealand, but he was very unpopular, and he was eventually relieved of that position. Why? He was relieved of that position by the British. And the reason was because in a certain land dispute, he took the native Maori side of the issue. So he was actually trying to do what today in the 21st century we would consider a good thing. And then hanging over everything all this time was the fact that the immediately previous captain of the Beagle had committed suicide. So here he was leading the ship on a difficult voyage, trying to do difficult things, and the captain right before him had committed suicide. Well, as a result, one day in later middle age, he got up to shave, which I don't do as you can see, but he got up to shave, and he slit his throat and died. So he's a tragic figure rather than a bad man. And that's the image that I wanted to leave with you today. This is Charles Darwin. Tally ho. And amen.